Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 13th meeting of the Housing Blue Ribbon Committee. We will start with the roll call. I am the Assistant Mayor, Joe Kelly. I'm here. Councillor Tabor?
Here.
Mr. O'Leary?
Here.
Jen? Here. Megan?
Here.
Byron?
Here.
Kagan?
Here.
Mary?
Here.
Eric?
Yes.
Councillor?
Yes.
Yes. And then from staff right now, we have Howard and Peter. I would look for a motion to approve the minutes from the 5/30/24 meeting.
So move.
Do we have minutes?
Yep. Was everyone able to see them? I know that there was a slight delay getting things uploaded to the city website. Unfortunately, our city clerk is a little ill and so is not fully back in Steam. So sorry for any delay of any posting of material.
Well, the packet still made it out to the
The
committee
packet still made it out. Yep.
And the minutes were in it.
The minutes were in it. And now everything's online. Cool. So we have a motion. Did we get a second? Megan, perfect. All in favor? Aye.
Abstain. I wasn't here, so I feel like
Yeah. You can, if you review them, you can still, but that's okay. Okay. And so we'll start with the co-chair remarks on city-owned land.
Well, I was, just to recap, our last meeting, all of you brought elements to the work plan and shared those with us, which was great, and thank you for the amount of time and work you put into that. We were noting as we went along, what are things that we can move on right away? And in talking with Howard, we came up with several. Jen, you had talked about Commerce Way rezoning. That sounds like low-hanging fruit. The additional city properties, we had some discussion around that. And I think that's an area we can keep moving on. We had good discussion with Tracy's help on downtown shared quarters. And that's an area that I think we can move on. And then the inclusionary zoning based on our RKG study, which is a longer timeline that will stretch out quite a ways, but there's some value in that. So, my hope for tonight was that we could talk a little bit about Commerce Way rezoning, the benefits of that. As you see in the agenda, Howard's got that teed up. And see if we could get that to any kind of action at the next meeting. And then tonight I was, in terms of city-owned lands, I thought we could review the list that the Land Use Committee had and see if we want to add any criteria or add any additional parcels to that. And it would make sense.
That list did not make it into the packet.
Oh, okay.
So we can make it a comprehensive review at the next meeting.
Right.
Well, you can talk to him anyways.
We can speak to it. It's this list. I think it's been in the packet in the past.
I think it was in one of the first
Yep.
packets.
Right. But I'll put this idea out there. Would it make sense to focus on city-owned properties next meeting? And toward that end, we could talk about what are the criteria we're looking at. So, Sherburne was a city-owned property. It was recommended, the disposition's underway. We'll get an update on that. There were a couple of other finalists from the Land Use Committee, Greenleaf Avenue, where the old skate park used to be, the City Hall lower lot, and then there's this funny little parcel up in Atlantic Heights and Falkland Way.
And that one was because it's adjacent to PHA property that's already there that they
Right.
could use with it.
Right.
It's not buildable on its own, most
Yeah.
likely.
Right. So I took as a sense of the last meeting that we want to look at not just Sherburne, but additional city properties. And we want to, as you recall, way back when we started, the biggest single way we got below-market housing units into the city was through the Ruth Griffin project. So I thought, let's talk a little bit about the criteria we want to use for city properties. Then staff can come back, revisit that list, freshen it up, and we can talk about that next meeting, if that makes sense to you all.
Yeah, I think it's important when we on land use filtered a list, and I think there's been conversations of like there was a list of 100 and something plus properties. Some of those were strips of medians, non-buildable plots, things like that. So this list kind of dwindled it down to at least land use board criteria of what could be buildable lots. But if anyone wants to see that full list of 107 parcels of medians, and some of them are obviously parks, different things that we would not look to disturb. If anyone would like to see that full list, just let us know and we can send it on out. Mr. O'Leary.
As someone who's been through this list numerous times, it's kind of interesting, just to give you an example, there's a piece of property out on Lang Road. It's a beautiful piece of property. It's narrow, it's almost on the Rye line. It's kind of neat, but getting back to the criteria, it's difficult to get to. If we're looking to recognize that if one of the issues related to affordable housing is transportation, that's why one of those types of places go off the list.
Yeah. And I think Lang, to touch on what you said, Lang is a good example of there's not city infrastructure out there either.
That's right.
In those areas, they're on their own septic, they're on their own wells.
Right.
So again, looking at if we can find parcels that could be developed into, in a affordably and sustainable way.
Right.
We have to.
Like you say, the infrastructure costs would just make that prohibitive out there, so.
Yeah. Mr. Anderson?
Have we identified the amenities that would score a piece of property in, and then within those amenities, do we want to categorize them in,
Good point.
A, B, C, D?
Yeah,
E?
I think that's what we would.
And maybe that's already been done, but
No.
I haven't been through that exercise.
I would look at that. That would be an exercise that this committee would take on.
Yeah, I think that's our discussion tonight, if we can, is to do a little thinking about that.
Well, and just thinking about like criteria, I do think the low income housing, like tax credit, like criteria, they try to look at that too a bit, thinking about like proximity to, major transportation and schools and all of those things. So we could potentially use that as like a framework to just understand, and maybe that's what the land use had considered as well. I'm not sure, but.
You mean LIHTC credit criteria? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
The land use criteria,
Was very loose.
yeah, was
pulled up here, too.
okay.
There we go.
So I was part of the land use investigation that we're seeing up here, and it was certainly an informal, get out of the car, walk around, and have a look. It
Not
was
all bad.
Yeah, but that was after going through the more broader inventory, where undevelopable because it was in a median.
Yeah.
Undevelopable because the entire site was sealed.
It's in
Undevelopable
wetlands.
because it was landlocked.
Or wetlands.
Wetland, yeah, so all that went, this is what we got to, and we started, so.
Great, thank you.
And you can see our criteria across the top that we're using as we walk the site.
Excellent.
So the three parcels that were mentioned at the beginning, where are those on here? The skate park, screening?
Greenleaf, oh wait,
They're at the bottom.
so Sherburne, Junkin Zev, Falcon Way.
And then Green. I think we mentioned Greenleaf. the old skateboard park.
No, so Greenleaf
195, Greenleaf was added after the
after,
census was
yeah,
done.
that was after.
Because it's technically deed restricted and
Right.
leased out, so there was nothing in the short term
Yeah.
that we could do with it.
Who's it leased to?
Operation Blessing.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then they
They
just put
actually have a
in,
lease on the building from the city, so the city doesn't actually have control of the building.
okay.
yeah. And now there's right now, I think, a gym, through the Elks Lodge. They just raised a bunch of money to put a gym in there for that whole community.
Okay.
So that there's access for Operation Blessing, for the Crossroads House, and then the other development that's right there has.
So does that take it,
Wamsat.
does that take it off the list?
Well, I mean,
It was-
It's why we didn't originally consider it, because it would have been a much long-term look at it, because we didn't have control of it at the time.
And we're really, if I can, looking at this, in some cases, short-term, but also long-term. I mean, so it's, we don't take them off the list. I mean, you took them off there because of timing at that point in time, but certainly if it meets the other criteria.
There's no reason it can't be.
Whether it be, because we're not going to do everything now. And I think it makes sense to see what else is out there and have a plan,
Yeah, that property also needs the legal department to give us an assessment of the deed restrictions that are on it, because the Coast Guard did do deed restrictions.
Yeah.
So we need to have an idea of what that is to really know what we can do with it.
Byron?
Is there, so for this format around, this is the first time I'm seeing this, and so maybe I'm behind, but is there a format, because the numbers are, I guess, useful in understanding some rubric of scoring before, but I think it would be, I mean, like, and that's obviously the lexicon information is sort of like some of the caveats are associated with some of these properties, but I think a format, is it like a map version of this, or a different format that has like a more robust description of the properties and like how those dimensions got scored? So in this packet, there's also maps of each property.
Right.
So there's maps, of each, but nothing like together, right? Sort of. So these are all, okay.
All, yeah.
Well, they're not all in the same area.
No, totally,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to get one map
Yeah.
that you could all see on a piece of paper or even a
Right.
screen, and that all at the same time. So
that's excellent. Thank you for the work that was done with that.
If you want, maybe what we can do is just like geo map on the city and put dots.
Yeah, I was gonna.
or you could bring up the geomap right here, and
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
we did during our meeting. Is we
Yeah.
actually went through the geomap in our meeting and just
Okay.
kept going down, looking at different parcels.
So much fun.
Jen?
Is there a reason not to just, I mean, do we need to reinvent the wheel?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
Well, I know there was some discussion about looking at it fresh. And so we'll just put it out there, maybe we don't need to.
I agree with Jen. I think that, this process has been gone through. It goes, we went through a similar process, frankly, with the library when we were looking at sites for that. We did it with the police station. The land use did it. I mean, it's. I think that's a great place to start. I think that in those cases, and like, Beth is mentioning, there were different, I'll use the term, different criteria at that point. Timing was an issue with what she was dealing with. Ours were a little bit different, but the basic properties are the same properties. And so I think that, let's start with this. There may be some that, the beauty of, as I understand the process you went through, was that it was in line with what we're doing here. So it was following, in effect, the same track.
Yeah.
So,
And I would say that we would look to staff to, if we came up with the list, we would look to staff to grade them on the scale, and staff has already done it.
yeah, and again, if, they can go through it. We may disagree with the grading process, but that's part of the discussion that we have.
I don't want to lose Megan's point, though, that for below-market housing for the tax credits, there are criteria like childcare,
Yeah, I would say though, I mean,
public transportation.
most places, we're very fortunate where we live, right? So pretty much any spot in Portsmouth is going to probably check a lot of those boxes because it's in Portsmouth. So, but I think it's just nice to look at it. And then I think we also need to balance it with sort of like what we're hearing from the community. Like there is the concern about green space. So would we score something higher that maybe isn't a green space right now, in terms of like utilization? So it's just something to think about as we move into that realm.
I absolutely, I think maybe we add another column to this that says, like community impact, you know what I mean?
Sure.
To kind of touch on that, that says, would this negatively impact?
Takeaway.
Is it a takeaway?
And again,
Yes, without an immediate replacement, because I know that that's been a conversation. If we take away, we need to make sure we replace.
and again, I can't frankly see everything up there, but that's okay. I mean, we can add one for green space.
Oh yeah, we don't have to
You know,
reinvent it.
So, I
yeah.
mean, we don't have to reinvent it, but if there are other criteria that, that should be taken into consideration, we can add it.
My understanding from reading the memo was that green space was considered.
Yeah, there's a line for conservation,
Yeah.
utility, or other easements.
There was also several properties that were so currently heavily used for recreation that we took them off the list. So
Yes.
you would consider that they would have ranked so low because there's pathways, there's people using them all the time, even though it's very informally.
Yeah.
And they're not formal. There was one on Sagamore, there was one on Jones, there was several of those that were like, okay, well, if they're that heavily used already
Right.
for recreation purposes, then we'll want to try to leave them in
Yeah,
that state.
the only one though, like the Sherburne softball field, but I do hope that there are
There's a
active
replacement
plans
already.
to
There's already
replace.
There's a replacement already that will be funded.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't.
Yeah.
I made that promise that day.
Well, because John brought up the
And the community
library,
campus,
and
right?
we lost like a softball field
Yes.
with that, and it was never replaced. And then
I promise you now on the recording in the will be a direct replacement for that.
for the girls,
For the girls.
we got to take
softball
care of the
team.
girls.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
There's one other footnote to the last process, and it was almost as if Nick was saying, I wish we'd done this. It said, the PHA has additional properties that they could expand what they're doing.
And,
And that's nowhere on this list.
well,
Correct.
I would say
We talked about Falkland Way, that they would be able to put up, if we added that to the land they already have in front of Bedford Way property, there would be enough place for them to expand there. So that conversation did happen. If you're talking about other existing properties, they did a whole charrette process on Gosling Meadows.
so yes.
Yeah.
That's owned by PHA. This is owned by us.
Right.
And there was,
Which is which?
This is city
PHA
property.
owns everything to the left. Where that big building is, that's all
got it.
PHA. So if we gave them that sliver that we have, because they
this
already
is the one
own.
in Atlantic Heights.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
There is
Bedford
a
Way,
community
yeah.
garden there, so we obviously want to
Be aware of that.
when we. It's not a big one. I lived there, but
yeah, and again, it's not something that we need to be involved in, but a couple of years ago, there was an article, when I was preparing to be part of this, I did a search, and there was an article about PHA expanding Gosling Meadows, basically, so that I guess they must have land off of there that, and again, that's just, it's nothing that we're involved in, but it's also part of the whole community situation, so.
As I mentioned, they actually did a full charrette process on how they could expand Gosling Meadows. And that was only, I don't know how many years ago.
2016.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can't remember what year, I just
Yeah.
remember it
I've read
happened.
a lot about it.
Yeah. My understanding was the concern of displacement during construction because they would have to shift entrances, so they would have to lose some buildings to build other buildings. And so versus a space like this, potentially, obviously none of us sit on their board and are part of their organization, a potential space like this would have no displacement of current tenants.
Yeah.
So that, I think, from my understanding, was their big concern with Gosling Meadows, is that they would then have to displace, upwards of a couple dozen families
Yeah.
to then build. And as we know, there's really no place to put it.
Right, that's why we're all
That's why
here.
we're all here.
So one thing I'd like to add for criteria and using what's up there now is the idea of density and what is appropriate and where these are located. There's some city-owned land in a more urban area, maybe there could be higher density. In a place like this, you may be able to get into a mixed density of sorts, where you could have single-family on the left side of the entrance road to match with, and then you could have higher density more where the gardens area are now, so.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And again, it fits with the community.
Now, would we actually, though, like as a work group, would we actually be driving that? Because my understanding is like we would just kind of move forward with
Recommendations.
like, the recommendation of the process and not necessarily like the specificity of like what's actually happening and going to be put there.
So that is part of the juggle we have as a non-policy making board, and as, you know what I mean, a commission that is not like the planning board and zoning board. So what we could put forward is potentially a recommendation with the idea of a joint force working group. You know what I mean? And we could be, as the committee, be the citizen representation on that working group as you go to try to funnel through it. But no, I think at some point we do not have control of you know, what is built on certain property.
Right.
In the sense beyond any zoning recommendations that are then, you know, put forward through the planning board and accepted. But just like if a private developer bought a lot and decided to build next to you, there's only so much say that anyone can get.
Right.
But we can recommend properties to dispose of for housing.
Yes. I'm going to go Mary and then John.
I don't want to bog down the process by adding another column, but I think it could be interesting to think about quality of life for residents in terms of air quality or other environmental impacts. So like that is right next to 95.
Yes.
And thinking about, I think obviously bringing as much housing as possible into the area is important, but maybe starting where there's a higher or a lower air quality or a better air quality.
I'll tell you, I lived literally right here.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my car. That's my car. For 6 years. And while I understand that, in that area, it's like
It's because of the river and everything.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are like the downsides that there were many nights I woke up screaming because of air brakes on semi trucks.
Yes.
And then after about, you live there. After about 6 months, you kind of tune it out. Right now I live on Coakley, directly, literally off the off ramp. I can
Yeah.
see it. And it's the same thing. You kind of end up, I call it the ocean.
Yeah.
Some days when it's loud, I'm like, it's really wavy out today.
Right. That's why dogs don't smell
Let's
their
go
own
John
scent.
and then Byron.
Just a quick comment. Where I grew up, it's not the case today, but I was directly across the North Mill Pond from the B&M Railroad. And they'd start switching cars at 6 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning. And like you say, you get to the point where you just ignore it. But no, as far as property is concerned, one of the other things that is a tool is covenants. If the city disposes of property, you mentioned that, then they can, whoever buys it can do what they want, except if the city transfers it with covenants in place. So that's a tool that's available, whether you use it or not, it's a tool.
Okay. Any other criteria considerations?
Should we?
You had something?
Yes.
I wouldn't want to add I didn't want to add a column or criteria. I was just wanted from I guess what I'd like to have is like a CSV of the properties in the new columns that we're talking about. It would be helpful for me and my understanding to have like a live document, maybe even just like read access of that, right? Like I'm sure there's a CSV that's powering essentially this analysis and where that's coming from. So I'd be interested in like having access to that along with like the new columns that are being added, just as like a helpful tool.
Would everyone like us to resend out this packet?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I can't speak for everyone, I'll speak for myself.
And we don't have to wait for the
We can just
next
send the
meeting
link.
packet.
We can
We'll
just send
it
the
in.
link.
It's a public document.
Yeah.
We'll just send the link.
But Howard, if you have like the raw CSV that's behind this, or Excel or spreadsheet?
Nick loved using Word for everything.
Yeah, that's
so
literally Word.
That's a Word thing, but I can.
You toss tables in and
Yeah,
put it in.
everything. So
you can do that.
That can easily be translated into an Excel file, and columns added and the criteria added. So.
Someone a headache.
Yeah, it's not in, yeah, he didn't use Excel.
Okay, so.
Have to add them up?
So we'll send this link out to everyone so everyone gets it again. Any any more conversation now before everyone's able to dive into this a little bit deeper, and then
I have one point of clarification. Sorry, John. We're talking about disposing of land, but we're doing long-term leases, right?
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
It could be either or.
So in the Sherburne RFP, is it,
That's
tell
a
us-
long-term lease.
it's a long-term lease.
Right, that's what I thought. Okay. But for these, we're saying it could be a sale or,
Could be a deed restricted sale if it's just not a property we could do anything with, like the Falcon Way. I see that as being a deed restricted sale versus a long-term lease.
that's Atlantic Heights, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, right. Because there's no reason we'd want it back,
Right.
really.
As long as we restrict its use.
One of the things that I may bring up, and again, just, I'll say it now so people will think about it. If we have multiple pieces of property, I'd like to see the value of the properties. So we know what we're dealing with regards, we get property A and property B, and we see them as addresses, we see them as pictures, but what is the value of those?
You're talking about like
properties?
city assessed value, or
City assessed value, certainly, let's put it this way, as we know, the city assessed value, is certainly a criteria that allows you to compare properties. It doesn't necessarily tell you what the value of the
So
property
you're looking
is.
for a potential like realtor to say what is the
Well,
market value?
I'm
market
not
value?
looking for anything real formal, but let's use an example. Let's just say that most properties in the city have a value that's 140% of what the assessed value is.
Yeah.
I mean, something simple like that, so that, in other words, as I've said before, Sherburne has an assessed value of $5 million.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's worth probably $7 million, which is 140% of
Yeah.
what the assess. And I think that's, but I mean, I think at some point in time, just having that information is good to have.
Yeah. I did want to mention, though, something people may not be aware of is, like, Griffin Place was city land generating no income, and the PHA pays a payment in lieu of taxes. So there's income now that there wasn't before. Now, other people could say, well, the city could have sold that for millions of dollars, but, the city's trying to serve a public purpose, and I would argue our public purpose is trying to get people places to live.
Yeah.
That's also short money versus year
Yeah.
over year over year.
Sure.
I will say one of the things I'm trying to do when I was talking earlier that I spoke at the New Hampshire Housing multifamily housing conference last Friday. It feels like 17 years ago. And one of the things is they brought in an economist from California who is a lead economist in housing, and she literally ran the numbers for Portsmouth in New Hampshire. We'll just go with the broader picture of New Hampshire, and sent it to several colleagues to double check the numbers because we are the anomaly. We have a 0.5 vacancy rate of all housing in New Hampshire, which literally is so unheard of.
Oh, yeah.
And she went through a lot of the trends of permitting, and that you saw a decline after the 2008 housing crisis, but then you saw what she called the hockey stick goes back up. In New Hampshire, we've not gone back up to the permitting levels that we saw pre 2008. So again, it goes back to our supply. We have a major supply issue. As we all know, in this group, we need around 60,000 units in the state of New Hampshire in the next, decade or so, just to keep 2030 by the end of this decade. Sorry, just to keep up. And so it was. I'm trying to get that slide deck so I can send it to everyone here. I asked the speaker, and she's supposed to send it over because it was so much data that I was blown away at in comparison to really drive home how bad this general housing crisis is, and then you add the affordability level on top of it. But I'll try to get that to you guys in the next few weeks. When it gets sent to me, I'll send it right over.
Thank you.
I know people in this group love data.
There was a lot of data.
That we do.
So we can take the list and put those columns in. We'll get an Excel version for Byron.
Thank you.
And run the analysis again, if that's okay, and have that list for our next meeting. And then we can discuss them one by one. We are going to only one meeting in July and one meeting in August, so there might be an opportunity for a field trip day that we could go visit these sites.
Do you have those dates?
Yeah, we have to just make sure everyone's okay with it. So the dates that we were looking at would be, we would still have our June 27th meetings. So therefore we'll have some updates from that. And then we would be looking at July 11th and then August 8th. The city council only meets once in July. And then
They do meet on the 5th of August, that
we
Monday.
do meet on the 5th of August, so if there's anything that the group wants to bring forward, we would bring it forward to that council meeting. And then we're back in regular to a month in August.
In August?
Oh, in August or September?
September.
Yes, I meant city council, sorry. City council has two
2 in August,
in
yes.
August.
You said July 11th, and was there an August date?
Yep,
August
August
8th.
8th. Does that work?
I can't do the 8th because my
Okay.
sister-in-law's getting married the next day.
That's so
so.
exciting.
And the whole family's in the wedding, so.
Yeah, there'll be
the rehearsal.
summer, we're going to have some
I
absences.
have an event at 7:30, as long as you can get me out on
We
time.
will hard stop.
It's a good reason.
For everyone else, those two dates.
I think so.
I'm going to be absent on the 27th this month, but
Okay.
those 2 days work. Yeah.
And as always, if you're going to be absent, please just let the chair peoples know or staff, so that we can just make sure that we. What we don't want is for a few of us to show up and then we don't have a quorum.
Yeah.
And we.
Can we skip September 5th? That happens to be street life.
Maybe we move that to the.
Does the 20?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you,
No,
please.
Beth just, which date were you on?
September 5th happens to be street life.
Should we move that?
So
Yeah.
if you have it, I'm not going to be able to.
I won't be available on that day either.
Okay.
It's hard because that's like right after Labor Day.
Labor Day.
Yeah, that's the week of Labor Day. Labor Day's on
So we don't
Monday,
wanna
so
meet. It's a short week.
Yes.
It's a
do
short
we
weekend.
want to switch that to the 12th of September?
that's Vintage and Vine.
Oh, I can't do that.
It's a good thing I have everything on my
Maybe-
calendar.
Maybe for now, we'll say that we'll not meet on that day.
And you already have one scheduled for the 19th, so
Yeah.
maybe we just do one a month for 3 months
We have a housing committee schedule on the 19th?
of September.
Where do you see that, Beth?
We
I'm
just
looking
have
at
it
my
every
calendar.
other.
We have it every other Tuesday, and I have a reoccurring appointment in here, so it's already in here.
September's kind of summer.
Yeah. It's summer too.
Labor Day is summer-ish.
Yes. So just so we don't drown ourselves in dates that are too far out, let's take a vote on moving to only hold meetings in July for July 11th and then August 8th. I would look for. Do I have a second? Sure. Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. Okay. Now on to working groups. We have our zoning working group who.
Yeah.
We are.
The 3 of us, yes.
Okay. We, in terms of zoning working group, near term, I'll circle back to Commerce Way. that makes sense. Maybe that's a quick one-off. And then longer term, we saw some priority to shared quarters downtown.
What do you mean by shared quarters downtown? Are you talking about like
Roommate?
boarding house, dormitory style
What's the
housing?
better term?
Yeah, term of art needs to be specific.
Would it,
There's a boarding house in our ordinance as a use.
We do. But we're talking
it's
like
outdated.
actual development of properties being allowed to actually create spaces that would be used like that. So basically,
community living?
shared bathroom, shared whatever kind of
Yeah.
spaces.
Community living is a
Community
little bit more
living.
general term. You're right.
No, that might
The
be-
boarding house, I think, has a connotation that's a bit
It does.
outdated. And then the implications of even dormitory style is challenging too. So
I mean, so just community living?
Community living.
Yeah.
Whatever, and there used to be, like, there was one on Islington Street down next to the old telephone building that had people living there. Then you had the one on Pearl Street.
You're talking
obviously.
about Brewster. It's no
And
longer
Brewster Street.
one. It's my
yeah,
neighborhood. Yes,
yeah,
I'm very
yeah,
familiar
yeah.
with all of them.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of interesting, and the fact is, I made a list early on when we were talking about, and I put 3 things on here. One of them was best discussion about, employee housing, and I think at some point, you mentioned you're going to have somebody come in that deals with, that has experience in that area? Yes.
The Dover
I
project?
don't remember the conversation. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I'm like, I need more information.
The project in Dover with the,
Yeah.
there were tiny homes.
Oh, John and Maggie Randolph.
John.
Okay, and, that was one of the things. The other thing I wrote down was when Jerry Duffy, even though he thought I tried to shut him off, was talking about, the old Elks Club, and, what changes do we need to make that would allow something like that to work? And the other thing that kind of stuck in my mind is that the former mayor spoke at one meeting about, I believe he was talking about abatements for rentals. I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, or like an incentive or
An
something.
incentive, and I didn't quite get that, and so I was gonna, did that resonate with
Well, that's
anybody?
one of the things we've talked about, like when we get into like payment in lieu of, or trying to figure out ways that we
I
can.
think this was talking about not like increasing a value for a period of time
Yes, if they're
of their
renting
property
that.
so that the taxes would stay lower if they're renting at a certain level. I
Yes.
think that was the
That was-
equate to.
Okay.
Yeah, keeping the mom and pop ones.
And again, the other, my question when I hear all of these things that frankly I've never heard of before, not that, I've heard everything, but, first of all, is there enabling legislation for that to take place? And if there is that something, again, relating back to what he said at the meeting, half the properties are rental properties, so that's a place where you could have a big impact. I would just ask staff to kind of let us know.
John, did you put that in your working plan?
Pardon me?
it's alluded to in the work plan, but it can be written in more directly into the work
Okay,
plan.
thank you.
But let's come back to zoning working group.
I'm making a list as you're talking.
So, if I could add in or pick up where we were saying, what about downtown? And Tracy had spoken about, as part of the zoning working group effort in terms of establishing what that is, they could also develop a definition, right, of community living or something.
allowed in zoning would have to be defined and figure out
could
what
be used.
zoning would allow it.
Right.
Yeah.
Or is it more of a matter of what do we have in our current zoning code that we need to take away to allow it?
It's both.
Yeah,
It's-
we're gonna
yeah.
have to add if we're taking something away and we potentially have a gap, we're gonna have to add something that's a defined ordinance within that specifically allows it. From my
Yeah, because we have a use table, right? So it would have to be a use that would be allowed in what districts do you want to allow it in?
Right. And parking, of course, is the big relief.
Well, as part of zoning, maybe we should look at whether or not parking should be in our zoning or not.
Should it be in the site plan?
Thank you. Gosh, I was trying to keep up with. Right. Okay. So, relative to if it's so, the way the code works, if it's not specifically allowed, it is definitely prohibited. Is that like the
Supreme Court has said that,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Which is why I kind of harp on like in us in our working group coming up with the definition, coming up with a table of use, and coming up to where it could be used.
Can we
Because-
generally override that? So, like
Is there local autonomy to do that?
to say
That depends.
Yeah,
I'm going to give you the truly attorney answer. That depends.
because that would be a way to get out from underneath that of having to allow list everything.
Well, so there's legislation that has tried to go through that deletes all zoning
Right.
and allows essentially allows but takes away any municipal control. Is the way they've written
Right.
the legislation that was put forward is that it removes all municipal control because there's very little state defined.
An example of that is
Yeah.
ADUs. When the state ADU model came,
Yeah.
we either could craft an ordinance that conformed to it, or we could just use it as it stood, but we couldn't say no.
We couldn't say.
Right.
Right.
That's just one example.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to get away from. I think what I was trying to get to was where that we don't not that we don't have local control, but just that the local control we have is prohibitive instead of like specifically prohibitive instead of the opposite, which is specifically allowing things to happen. With then the blanket statement is you can't do anything unless we specifically open those things.
Right.
And it's just like a much more.
So you want to take away all regulation?
No. But I want the regulation we have to be specific, like to specifically prohibit things we don't want, as opposed to prohibiting everything and specifically allowing some things.
So you want to join?
That
us
would
on
be a total rewrite.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be a total
I'm just,
rewrite
yeah, right. I'm.
of hundreds
But I
and
think
hundreds.
this, I think one of the things you're touching on, which is one of
Aaron
the
just
things that
volunteered.
we talked about in the beginning, but we've never really done.
Yeah.
And I would actually love us to do it, and maybe over the summer, and then we revisit in the fall. Is to walk the neighborhoods that we like and figure out again what we
How to
couldn't,
make them
how we
possible.
make them possible again.
Yeah, I'm not saying we shouldn't work within the allow this style like thing. I was just trying to think.
No, but I agree with what you're saying. So it's figuring out, okay, we like this. What in our zoning prohibits it? Can we remove some of it?
Yeah.
Some of that has to do with building code.
Yeah.
So
And I
you can't take that away.
And the other thing that comes into play, and I'll defer to Beth and to the staff, but ordinances are enforced on a complaint basis. So if you've got somebody who's done something and it's been there for years and nobody's complained about it, that's why it exists.
Don't tell Jason that.
What's
Or
that?
if we don't know about it.
We don't know.
But I mean, it's the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the truth. And the fact is that, I mean, whether it be some of the simple stuff, I mean, we had issues with regards to sheds. Sheds weren't allowed, but nobody ever complained about them, so it was never an issue. And then people said, oh, and reading the ordinance, it doesn't say that they're allowed. So that's when you had to deal with those types of stuff.
Right, which is why I think fundamentally I was pointing out the logical problem of having everything be necessarily prohibited and specifically allow things because of that specific reason, where the practice doesn't match the policy, and like we've created that. Yeah.
And Byron, you're trying to grab the bull horns, but you're starting to get the idea of so many people are saying we need to take care of the regulations of the zoning
Yeah.
and simplify it. But there's such complication to when you shift one little element to try to simplify it, of how there's a ripple and how it affects other little areas. So without going through a comprehensive overhaul, it's a slow process. It's needed, agreed. But you're starting to grasp the intricacies and how delicate it is to try to make things simpler, while sometimes it ends up making it more complicated. So,
And the frustration.
yeah.
No, I'm frustrated.
I mean, maybe, Beth, you can speak from experience. if we want to enable this community living, what kind of process steps do we need to go through? You were able to redo the ADUs, we were able to redo gateway zoning.
So you're looking for an overview of how things actually end up getting changed. So first, there has to be the idea to do it, and what do you want to do? So I will use the ADUs as an example. So we spent months talking about how could we make the ADUs easier for people to build and less costly. We actually had focus groups. We had 3-4 different focus
Yeah,
groups.
we talked to people who had applied and not built. We had talked to people who applied and built. We talked to builders and
We talked
architects.
to engineers, architects, we talked to homeowners and all different people. So we got all this information. We also put out a survey citywide and got that information. And then we crunched all that information because it was our goal. In order to make these easier means we need some that are allowed by right. And so that was kind of the goal that we were trying to get to. And then we negotiated for months to get what we could get by right. So that's what we have now. And everyone's like, but it's more complicated. I said, no, there's more information in there so people have a better direction of where to go versus less information so that they don't have a direction to go. So that's kind of, so we came up with an ADU ordinance that was revised. We then submitted to City Council, where City Council then gets to have their review of it, and then they are required by law to then send it to the Planning Board, where the Planning Board reviews it, can change it, has a public hearing, and then they make a recommendation back to City Council, where we then see it, schedule it for first reading, can amend it at first reading or second reading, and until we have third reading, it doesn't become law. So you can see that this is why it took almost a year and a half, 2 years for me to change the ADU. And that was just one small section.
I'm not at all poking at the timing on the ADU. I think the ADU.
No, I'm just trying to use it as an example.
Yeah.
That's that's what's in front of us. That's
Sure.
the kind of process
Yeah.
that it has to go through.
I understand.
And I think it's
Yeah.
important to mention, which I think you just did, that the recommendations that we worked on for that long also got changed in planning board.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So which is frustrating. You know what I mean? Because now it's getting nitpicked, and we wanted a little bit more broader. But we wanted more things allowed, and then as it came through planning board, it was sliced down a little bit to the point where even myself, who worked on it, is a little frustrated, but understanding that we were not the finite body of that. So I think that is a realistic expectation for this group, is that I think we will have some aggressive and really good, thorough, thought out ideas, and then it is going to get picked apart as it goes through the land use boards. Yes.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important that we sort of preempt that by having conversations. Building ordinances were brought up. So if we could bring in somebody from the inspections department or to kind of give us the red lines that they're not going to be willing to cross, that'll help inform the work that we're doing, so that when we're walking in those neighborhoods, we don't look at a beautiful building and say, oh, I'd like this to be part of our template, only to find out that far down the process that it's not possible.
I do think we'll have to give them some examples so that, Shanti's really great, and I know that he's willing to come in and talk to us, but I think we have to give examples to him, because there is some leeway in certain things. Like we just talked about in my 1950s home, the basement is not 7 feet tall, which is the current clearance for to finish a basement, but that basement was finished before that building code was set. So I think I agree with you, and that we will figure out within Shanti's schedule to get him in here to talk with him about figuring out, hey, where does building code come into when zoning ordinances are considered. But there is even, fight a little bit between boards and the inspector. I think some people know what's going on in Daniel Street, where the building inspector said this building is basically condemnable. We can't have it repaired. And then we have our HDC saying you need to repair it and fix it. So, there's headbutting inside the circle also, which is
fun.
Well, but in terms of doing community living, we could talk to Mark McNabb. We could talk to who has wanted to do this downtown for some time.
Sure.
we could talk to whoever did the stadia. Is that Eli?
Eli, yep.
It's under construction now.
Yeah, but his experience.
That's micro units.
A little different.
Which, if I recall correctly, too, Tracy was saying bathrooms were a big, like,
They're expensive.
they're very expensive, and it's what required 1-to-1, where it's like one person, one bathroom, if I recall correctly. But that's where but that's where I think the micro units probably sprung from to build those to be compliant with the.
I think a lot of it has to do with where bedrooms can be placed, whether or not they have windows, there's access, and all of that is what plays into a lot of that.
Yeah. Right, but can you build 700 square foot or
Well, ADUs are 750 square feet.
And we wanted them smaller.
so there's footprint restrictions.
Yes.
Nothing
Which
wrong
is-
with a 500 square foot
I mean,
apartment.
I again, I know I always talk about it. I look at Atlantic Heights. 632 feet is the average size of an Atlantic Heights one, which is what, when we were talking about ADUs, we were like, okay, well, this is livable space. And then it went to planning board, and planning board said, no, 750 is minimum livable space, which I also think is an insult to all of the dozens of residents who live in under. And I think another interesting example, and I would look to staff not for an answer today, but on Cabot Street, we have that those apartment units that are, the bathrooms are across the hall. So there's the unit. I know it's like a very, like, people don't know about it unless you have a friend who's ever lived there. But on Cabot
Oh,
Street,
the new one.
No, not on Cabot. On
Union?
no, it's the little Columbus.
Oh, Columbus Street.
Yeah, next to the park, there's a triple decker, and in those units, they're studios essentially, or modular one bedrooms, and then their bathrooms are on the other side of the hallway.
And they share them?
No, but they're not. All,
They're not within their living
they're
space.
not.
No, I'm just-
No, they're not shared. They're individual.
But
But they're not.
They're not in the-
They're not
That's
within their
New York
living
City.
space.
Detached.
They're detached. You know what I mean? So I'm not a builder.
So people could see you when you walk across the hallway, is what you're saying. Other people.
I've been there.
It's public.
But what I'm saying is that
Slippers.
for a builder, I would assume it's potentially less expensive to build a row of bathrooms. That if you're talking about, I don't know. I just look at something like that. Of that, I assume would not be allowed in our code today.
No.
I think we would call that a boarding house.
Yeah.
Which is the closest definition we have to something like communal living.
Yeah.
So I think the process is either to look at a new use or modify boarding house, maybe rename it. So it's, and then figure out, because it's only allowed in 3 districts by special exception now, so.
Yeah.
And it's required to have a license from the city, I believe, as well.
so.
Byron.
Well, that answers my first question, which is where is community boarding at? Where is it currently allowed? So thank you for that. My second one is we keep talking about we keep prefacing community living with like downtown community living. Is there anything specific that it has to be downtown? We're just okay.
No, this
So-
is what we would say is
Yeah.
that right now it's only allowed in certain areas.
Because right now it's general business, Gateway 1, CD4W, which is the west end.
But by
and then
license and
business.
exception, so like.
So a
yeah.
boarding house is not even allowed downtown.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And the definition is like 3 people who aren't related living together?
Well, that's the definition of a family. A boarding house is a residential structure other than a bed and breakfast in which rooms are rented, leased, or otherwise made available for compensation to more than 2, so it's between 2 and 10 individuals, and where the rooms do not contain separate cooking or bathroom facilities. So they would have shared cooking and bathroom facilities and could be up to 10 rooms.
Is this just roommates, or is this like a more collaborative, cooperative housing?
There's 2
Or
of
is
them
it both?
already, and they're
More
not
collaborative.
roommates. They're more collaborative.
Yeah.
Okay.
You mean on Middle Road?
There's one on Hanover and there's one on Cabot. I know most people don't know they're there.
I think what Tracy was trying to get at was like
the roommates
roommate situation.
for
where if
PHA
you had a
housing.
room, a house with 4 bedrooms, and they all, and one kitchen, however many bathrooms, and those 4 people were unrelated, it
Right,
would
that's-
be considered a boarding house.
Because the definition of a family says that
Which
it's
happens all
up
over
to
the
it's up
city.
to 3 individuals not related by blood.
So if you have
Okay, so
four-
I don't mean to kill this, but we do have to move on. So this is something that if we're looking for if I would say if this really piques your interest, you should join the zoning working group. Because these are things that we can be tackling in, like, do we need to change, is there a state RSA that we can supersede of what what defines a family in a shared living, section? Is there?
I'd like us to also look at whether or not if we allowed people to have 2 ADUs as long as one of them was rented at workforce housing levels.
I'd say just for like code enforcement background, if we wanted to reach out to Durham, they
Yes.
are very good at enforcing the codes regarding
Yes.
all of that stuff.
And
So
they have a lot of that housing.
Right.
There's
Sure
city
do.
manager.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll touch base with Todd.
So that cues up community living for the land use, or the zoning working group. And I would also suggest Commerce Way.
I have that on the list.
And parking.
I have that on the list. And the walking neighborhoods and my ADU. It's a long list.
Should we, right?
Yes.
So I was gonna, should there be 2
Working groups?
for one for near term and one for long term? Maybe, I don't know if that would be helpful.
I would offer up that you break parking out from zoning, because there's so many components to that.
So maybe we
I'm
want,
cautious about breaking out groups to
I'm just
short-term and long-term, because you can have a short-term effort, but you could have long-term effort that's going to start in the short term and continue on.
what if
I
we
think they
break
could
up-
I think the working group should prioritize which ones to work on.
What if, because going through this, there's a lot of conversations of parking and transportation and multi-mode. So maybe there is a working group that is discussing that, and I'm looking in this corner.
For volunteers, you're looking for
Raise their
volunteers?
hands.
Mary.
Maybe there's a working group of
Yeah.
To
that.
talk just transportation?
Yeah.
I should probably be on that one too. I don't know where I'm going to have the time. Well, considering I'm now the chair of the RPC, and it's going to be my goal that we have a regional public transportation by the end of my reign in 2 years. So
Yeah.
God bless you.
And not to complicate things, but as I'll go through in a little bit greater detail in the developing work plan, there's a lot of financial implications to housing, and so if there was any interest of a working group of sorts on finance, with an interest on finances,
Yes.
and
Financing it, how to
no,
pay?
not keep it
financial.
broader term in terms of finances, and what I mean by that is not an example of that would be how to finance housing, right? But another example is that there's a program in Kittery that gives out a program, money towards people developing an ADU as a low-income
Like a grant?
right?
Okay.
And then
we had a housing trust with money in it. That was one of the things I wanted to do.
And the financial working group would come up with what could the financial structures be of an affordable housing trust, which I would like to name something else besides an affordable
Yeah.
housing trust.
So-
But there's all other types of, there's the financial committee could be
The first-time home buyer.
program and those type of things, so.
It can also be, if we could, a private sector getting the banks and the big employers together, and can we create a revolving loan fund that's 1% money and
think-
dedicated to affordable housing?
One of the things that
I'm keen to work on that.
I'm really pushing for working groups is because we've seen in other committees, that's really how we get a lot, like, things done. I think the EDC is a really good example, is that there's several working groups, and so the working groups, really dig into things and then share with the committee, and the committee then, before we make any finite decisions or recommendations, work through any of those things. But as we all know, we're all dedicated, hardworking people here, but we can sometimes get lost in the weeds. And so I really think, as Howard said, getting these 3 working groups and breaking us up into those, I think will really help us start to put out some recommendations, which I know is the goal of everyone here in this room.
And I'll offer up the context of, we've been meeting every 2 weeks.
Yes.
We'll be meeting once a month, and so the working group can have a little bit more sustainable, less intense, but more ongoing type of work effort.
We won't have committee of the whole meeting as much, so you'll get some more time back.
Yes.
I do think, I would submit that the city properties may be best to pursue as a committee of the whole, because if we're going to go visit a property, the residents want to talk to all of us.
I think we need to put some names to these working
Yes,
groups.
okay, so we have a zoning, and now we are looking for transportation. We have Mary and John, and then we have finance. Thank you. Jen, you want to drop on that one too?
I mean,
So we have
if I
these-
can join, I will.
Yeah, we have these four. I knew that was going to happen.
You got those, Harry? I didn't catch who it was.
Oh, Jen, Megan, Byron, Dave.
No, so can we start from the top?
Yes.
Sorry.
So
So zoning is established,
Beth.
it's Beth.
Jen and Joe. It's JJ and B.
Yeah.
And it would, maybe we invite Tracy too, because.
I think she
we're
said
talking-
she was
She said she would.
Yeah.
She was interested. She wasn't sure if she had the time.
Yes. And then parking transportation is John and Mary
Right. And?
I'll jump on that one too.
and Byron.
And Beth said she
I
needed to be
said
on
I
that
probably
too.
should be.
Oops, sorry, a liaison.
If I can't make the meeting, I'll do my best.
So transit is John, Mary, Byron, and Beth.
Yep.
And then we have finance.
Is Jen, Megan, Byron, Megan.
You got really quiet on that last one.
And John.
I was like, I heard Jen, Megan, then
I can do that.
Yeah.
John.
4.
Oh, D.
And
Jen, Megan, Byron, and Dagan.
Yeah.
okay.
I'm on 1. Byron's on 2.
It's 5, right?
You're okay with just one?
Okay.
I can only do
I think,
one.
yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of like those. It's going to be a lot of data and figuring out like what ideas can come to fruition, what cannot come to fruition, what has been updated, what has not. Because I know like we've talked, and then we'll hand it over to Howard as we only have half an hour left. I know we talked about the first time home buyers program, and I know that program itself has gone through some changes in just the last year, some updating with the bank and things like that. So that will be.
I put out a request to the person that leads that.
Yes.
For a memo, just outlining some of the questions and concerns of the committee that have been voiced, and so that should be in the next packet.
Perfect.
So can I
So-
confirm it's John O that's on one and John T that's on another? Because you said John's in 2 different ones. I didn't know which John we're talking
John, no,
about.
you're not on one, right?
I haven't heard, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Okay, so it's John T on each.
There'll be another one, John.
Yeah.
John O. Don't you worry.
I'm like, wait, we have 2 Johns, and now I'm like, I don't know which one.
Eric, do you
Well,
have an interest
just,
in any of
you know,
those?
Beth, you have to understand that she's referring to me as Mr. O'Leary, so.
I think they've got colleagues that, put
Okay.
together.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
So,
Let's go to Howard.
yeah, a good hinge is Commerce Way, because that
Right.
that may be something that zoning can tackle right away. Maybe you can come back.
It's behind Market Basket. Oh, bartender ears, man.
Got all those offices behind Market Basket off of Woodbury.
The one on Woodbury,
Portsmouth
yeah.
Boulevard.
Woodbury one.
I only recognize them.
Yes.
We can just call it Commerce Way.
Okay, so in trying to bring a more vivid effort to some of these smaller items and connecting these smaller items about where else could we make ideas about a zoning change to create more housing opportunities. And then there's been conversations from the Places to Live dialogue and the committee about what could we do could we convert office space or industrial space? And so I'm trying to bring together a nexus of all these different ideas that are floating around. So Commerce Way has been floated before, so it would be good to bring it forward. For the record, we are not proposing any zoning change on this property right now. What we're doing is thinking about, could we? And if we could, what would it be and how would we do it? So Commerce Way, for some context, here's Commerce Way right here. Here's the Market Basket. This is Durgan Lane, correct?
Yeah.
Coming in over here. So you've got
Osprey Landing on the right.
Osprey Landing over here. the
Yep.
river and
This is the exit road. Had to deal with that.
so we're going to start going into a little bit more of the mapping aspect of
Are you,
this.
in this analysis, Howard, are you including Portsmouth Boulevard?
I think we need to.
So
I would vote yes.
you're more at a quick jog on this, and I'm just a
Think
little
about
bit
this
of
one a lot.
yeah.
That's a great proposal for our committee.
So this gives you the bird's eye, the overview, right? So what I included here is to start thinking about what the urban fabric may be. And so we have Osprey Landing over here. Obviously, some group clustered housing. You get smaller scale over here. You get into the mobile home park over here. More industrial, not industrial, heavier commercial, BJ's and the mall over here. Then waterfront activity. This is Sprague, so you've got some industrial up here. These tanks aren't there anymore. Then
Do you know how long ago those were removed?
Yeah, does that change?
we were flipping through some aerial images. It's been, what, 4 years?
I think that's about right.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
I would wonder what the
They were required to clean them all up.
Okay, because I know okay.
So that is all Sprague's property.
It is. Through here, it's a Sprague's property, but you'll see the zoning for it later on.
I think where the tanks were removed, I don't think that's owned by Sprague anymore, which is why I think it was cleaned up.
That property, I think, was all divided.
We can all go to the VIS, the other
All right.
website.
So when you start investigating this, you'll find out ownerships. And so as we're thinking about urban fabric, thinking about environmental constraints, and I just brought up the idea of wetlands. So if you were to drive out here, why isn't that property developed? Well, there's going to be environmental constraints. So this is why this property right here is still empty. There's wetlands and there's a river that goes through. So these are other elements to start thinking about when you're starting to think about zoning and changes and adaptive reuse and so forth. So
Is there sewer through all the way out down Portsmouth Ave and Commerce Way?
Well, there's a hotel.
Yeah, I
There's a
think the
hotel on
has
Portsmouth
it,
Boulevard,
yeah.
so I'm assuming yes.
Because years ago, we looked
It
at
might stop at the hotel, but
moving Seacoast Media Group over there, and there was a little area that didn't have sewer. We had to go under a road.
So when we start thinking about the physical attributes of the area, we can also start bringing in some ideas about the planning that went on for this. And what I've done is I can get an online copy of the master plan. The master plan previously considered focus areas for different places around districts and so forth. So Lafayette, as it comes through here and the highway corridor, that was considered more of a corridor. And where's our property? The Commerce Way that we're talking about right now, it's up here. It was considered more of being a suburban neighborhood, but that doesn't necessarily mean the visual perception we have of suburbia. You've got the idea of the attributes of the malls that we talked about. So if we go back, this area is being thought of all of this as suburban, and then you've got the corridor idea for planning that's through here. So when you start thinking about this area, start thinking about and look at the master plan. So what we see up here is the zoning map, and you can see the corridors reflected in more of the red and the orange as it makes its way through the city, through Route 1 and 95, and then down Lafayette. And those red areas are G1. And so what you see for orange in the corridor is also G2. The more yellows and jasmine, I guess, that you see are more the residential. What we're seeing for a zone designation here is the office research. And so in Portsmouth, we've got office research here, here, And down here, up here, I'm sorry.
It's Borthwick Ave.
It's confusing because the industrial is just a slightly deeper color of the purple. So you've got this area up here, which is zoned for waterfront. This is the Sprague property, office research, and then you get again into more of the residential. So a higher level thinking about this is do you want to have not as intense as what would be considered in a corridor, and slightly more intense that you would experience in some of the more Atlantic Heights and Osprey Landing. So to help visualize some of that,
Do you mean density by intense?
not only density, but is there, is that the end? There's meant to be more
There is?
sides. It's not clicking. So it's not only the density of housing units, but you start getting into the idea of roadways, right? And so if you were to drive up here, you get into multi-lanes for intersection. You cross through here, there's actually a very wide median that's in there, and it's one lane going in and one coming out. There's no passing. So it's an odd visual approach to an industrial area. Usually you would have a passing lane or a turning lane in the center, which you see farther over here. And then we're talking about, you were talking about Portsmouth Way. So it's just not Commerce Way, but the idea there, here's the hotel, of how far would you want to go to that zone? Would you want to incorporate that in to allow for a greater density? And so move into what I provided in your packet, and that was Article 4, which talked about uses, right? And you have the use table in there. And so you're going to start earning your planning degree by looking at that and start thinking about, if I change it to this zone, what is a permitted use now may become by special permit. But it doesn't, if the hotel, for instance, it doesn't necessarily mean you're making a current use non-conforming. What you were doing is that if that hotel were to come in, it would have a different, it would no longer be possibly allowed by right. It may have to go through a special permit process. So that's to start thinking about what land is there and what's an allowed use. I think an example of something that's not allowed now, it wouldn't be with a zoning change, is auto repair and those type of heavier, more intense uses that you see more along the corridor. So that's why the table was included in your packet.
But wouldn't our most flexible be gateway zoning? Isn't that-
A G2
G2 might be
is
more
gateway,
appropriate.
but a G1, which is allowing more intense uses, for instance, along Woodbury, maybe it wouldn't be, maybe it would be better if it were brought into here. That's all for everyone to think about.
With respect to housing, G1 and G2 are identical. It's just G2 has lesser intense commercial.
Commercial uses.
Right.
We had that discussion
Yeah.
around
The changing
Is
as
there
well.
Elwyn Park.
is there a zone that is like to what Joe was saying before around like Atlantic Heights, which is not so dense as 3-4 structure apartment buildings, but more in that duplex, triplex, triple decker style, and also include some of like the other gateway characteristics around commercial.
So like a mixed use.
It would either be a character district or a gateway district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Gateway District does allow a development type that's like a pocket neighborhood development, so you can have small,
Yeah.
but it limits the size of, it has a maximum size for dwelling units. So
What's the
it's kind of a cottage, so if it's a cottage court, it has a 1,400 square foot and 2-bedroom maximum size.
Can we get into the weeds on, I mean, I'm sure the zoning committee would get into the weeds on like changing those rules and like specifying new zones that would like potentially fit a different perspective on what is allowable?
Or changing those current ones, like
The
where it's
changing
2 bedrooms to
yeah.
3 bedrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess like
2 bedrooms and
I guess
1,400
yeah, changing existing would be great. I'm very much in favor of that. But I guess would it be easier or less knock-on effects to other parts in the city to create new ones specifically? I guess.
Have like a Byron zone and just define it however you want.
And
You could do that, right?
Can we?
So, in efforts to either try to simplify or complicate zoning, right? You could even go down the route of, I don't like any of the current zones, and if I change a current zone and add it here, how's it going to impact the rest of the city? You could even go down the route, I'm not encouraging it, because it might complicate things, of doing an overlay. Or you could create a whole new zone or something like that. So there's double-edged sword to this
That's
type
not
of
a
thing.
recommendation that we would.
Right. Other communities may, but
Yeah. But I do think, again, something like this, where we're going through as a zoning committee, or if anyone has an opinion, like, hey, if you come across this, here are some ideas. I think, looking at the cottage style and saying, well, 1,400 square feet can easily have
Like a 4-bedroom.
You have 3 to 4 bedrooms. So like going in and changing that may have the effect that we, want versus changing the whole zone or ordinance.
I guess a question that I have, if we were to change an area, so like we did this on the corridor, like Lafayette Road,
Yes.
bunch of Gate 1, and then 1 or 2 Gateway 2 areas. I think I can see the value in how that's adding the opportunity for more housing, but it hasn't secured a way to make sure that they are considered like below market or affordable, correct?
Yeah, there's no way to mandate unless, there's no way to mandate privately owned land right now because there's no enabling state legislation. So if somebody
Correct.
comes in and buys a piece of property and then decides to put in what we would consider market rate housing, unless they're looking for a variance or
Or
need-
an incentive.
or an incentive.
So that's where we got to look at what's allowed by right, and our people just, is by right enough
And
for them to do a
that's-
development, or
Yeah.
do we need to adjust that so that they need to get the incentive?
We need to
We need to
get a
lower
higher
by
density.
right so that we
Yeah,
encourage
exactly.
that.
And then
That's the downside,
Right.
because if I am understanding correctly, the property could be built with 3 bedrooms if it was negotiated. Or is that,
Well, this cottage
Yeah.
type, well, there is another housing, it's a co-housing unit that is up to 1,800 square feet and 3 bedrooms, so
Oh my gosh.
it's not just,
yeah.
That's humongous.
but, right, the incentives, when the incentives kick in, you have to do workforce housing.
Right, I wonder if it would be, I think it's just really important then that if our goal is to make sure that there is diverse housing and affordability as a component in everything, that we're making sure we're focusing on the incentive.
Right.
And some of that, though, from my understanding, talking to some of the developers, is the restrictiveness of what they're allowed to build drives up the cost. So there's a potential that they could, if they can get a couple more 3 bedrooms in there, maybe at market rate, then they're willing to give us a couple 2 bedrooms at workforce rate, depending on kind of the sticks and carrots of it. And there's, one of the things that they talked about which I thought was really good in the housing conference, was the change and variation of income levels. And so right now we look at like, hey, we want 10% at 80, 60 or 80 of the AMI. But, a couple projects that have been done have said, hey, we'll take 4 units at 80, 6 units at 60, and we'll be able to do 3 units at 20%. looking at type of voucher type programs. So
That's actually Ruth Griffin
Ruth
Place
Griffin
is
Place
actually
does that.
mixed income AMI, so it has different levels.
And so sometimes you'll
Correct.
hear people say, well, that's not true workforce housing, because they're spreading out the income variations to try to, again, encapsulate the whole market that's under. That's the big thing that I feel that I'm not sure we'll ever be able to fix it, but we're always talking about workforce housing, which has a definition of a certain AMI, but there's still a demographic of people that live underneath that AMI. So if we can
Yep.
incentivize,
You want housing for every income level.
then we have to kind of get away from that stuck definition of our head. But I agree with you. It's how do we change our incentives, and that's something we've talked about. We talked about at land use too, of lowering the threshold of by right, because we see developers building
Right.
things by right when they could. No, we've had developers say, yeah, I'm not going that extra story to so that I don't have to do X, Y, and Z that the city wanted. So I'm just going to build exactly what I can by right.
Right. Well, I don't know all the ins and outs, but like the proposal for like the Christmas tree shop.
That's what I was gonna
And
That's by right.
exactly, and it's fantastic. Like, that would be 300 some odd units, but there's no tie to like affordability.
And honestly, they're not even using the full
Yep.
density of by right. They actually have less units than they're allowed by right.
Right.
That's what needs to be fixed.
So we want. So in that sense, you're talking about mandated maximums.
I'm talking about lowering the density by right.
By right.
So that the incentives will be
Kick
kick in order to get the density that they need
Yeah.
to make it. That's what I'm talking about. And I don't have the exact numbers of how to do that, but I think that's the concept
The
I'm
flow that
thinking.
Managed with making sure it's not so restrictive that people look at Portsmouth and they say it's not worth it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I want
How do,
So
how do
to
we
go
balance
along
that?
with what you said, Joe,
Good discussion.
the idea of they don't go to another floor is because then they're not getting enough to offset the cost of the additional. So it's the idea of either you only allow a lower floor or you allow them greater height.
Yeah.
So they can spread that cost around. So
Do we have, I think it'd be important to know if that actually works, down zoning like that.
Yeah, I'm
Some
very
real-life examples.
I just,
Sorry, go ahead, Byron.
no, I was just going to say that I think the want to downzone so we can get the incentives, so we get the affordable stuff, is I totally understand the want for it. I just does it work? Is it working now? Is that are we getting what we want out of it? Is this like more restrictive downzoning style approach? Does that yield large market, like long-term solutions that will actually support affordability? Is like,
So it was talked about at the presentation and in the report from RKG.
yeah, but that I mean that's like inclusionary zoning that's like mandated.
No.
Well, the
report-
way that RKG proposal, it was looking like it was inclusionary, but I think what Howard's saying is we're
It
using
was
to
a
see.
way to allow the city greater negotiations with the developer
Right.
without it being a legal mandate of inclusionary
Doesn't
zoning.
exist.
So it's a gray area.
Megan?
So just kind of like off of the RKG study, one thing that I had asked for, and I'm hoping we could get, is like, what if we looked at West End Yards, and like if we had that data or that algorithm, what could we have potentially gotten? So then we really could understand to an extent what the impact of something like that may be.
I think it's also
20 up there, I think.
Yeah, I think
We
it's
got
also,
10%.
We got. I was going to say. I think it's also important to remember that the data shows that 10% is on average what inclusionary zoning mandates around the country, and we technically have 10% of affordable units built within the last spur of units that have been built. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, my question is not like a criticism. I want to
I
understand
actually
it.
think after the many months that I sat through work sessions with them on that, I actually think after looking at the RKJ report, we actually got what RKJ says is appropriate. That's the way I see it at this moment in time.
And
Which is the struggle.
Peter reminds us, we got 27.
Okay.
Yeah, I just knew it was 10%. I couldn't remember how many units they were as total.
Okay, so we will sign, just to keep moving on so we can wrap up very shortly. Commerce Way opportunities, if we can get that sent out, and then the working group will start tackling kind of
Start
what
working
that.
it.
We'll start working
on it.
Yeah, and I would offer up, just because you're not on the committee doesn't mean you can't send in some thoughts.
Absolutely.
The second is that correspondence back and forth
Yes.
in working groups
Yes.
does not isn't necessary to do minutes and opening and closing. So.
Can you say have to keep it to a certain amount of people, right? We
Yes,
can't go over 4, right?
Based on our-
No working group can have more than 4 for right to know and
Okay.
noticing.
Do we
issues.
already defeat that? I felt like we had some
We're
good
we're
engagement.
okay.
I think we're okay because we have 4 on zoning, we have 4 on transportation, and I have 4 in financial. So we are right at the max.
And what Howard was just saying is that those conversations in a working group, you don't when you meet, you do not need to take minutes. You don't need to do anything like that. You just bring your report back.
It would be good for each group, not necessarily to have a leader, but a convener.
Somebody who actually organizes the group.
Yeah, we'll let you decide amongst your own groups. So just to keep the timeline moving, because people have babysitters and date nights, we have the working plan update. Howard put all
Yep.
of these on our desk. We'll
So we've grown up. We've gone from 8.5 by 11 to 11 by 17. And what I have done is started to expand this, and I've introduced another column next to goal called topic or subject. And so that's why I brought up we should get a finance working group, is because that topic and subject includes many goals and objectives that are in here. What I've also done is I've added in some columns for the committee to do homework, to bring back in 2 weeks, to start doing some ranking. How difficult do you think it is? How great of an impact? And what's the timeline? And this is why I brought up the notion of timeline before. So when you think about a timeline, if you do a short timeline, it's going to be in the next year. A medium is 0 to 2, not necessarily 1 to 2. So there'll be things you start now, and it's going to keep going. A short timeline means you want to get it started and accomplished in a year. And then long term, it may be something you start now and you build upon, and it takes 3 years to accomplish. And then stakeholders, who's going to be involved with this? Is it going to be a working group of the committee? Is it going to be somebody in the public sector? An example would be if we were to have McNabb come in, he would be a developer, he would be a stakeholder. And who's responsible? Is it going to be a staff, or is it going to be a working group member? So do the rankings, and this is probably the largest it's going to get. And once we start having rankings and we can start organizing this in terms of priority, it's going to change in terms of categories, and it's going to start getting smaller. So it will get a lot easier to be able to reference.
Do we have this electronically?
I can send it out electronically, but I wanted to hand it out so people that weren't comfortable with the Excel file could easily write it down. So.
Well, and then it also allows us to kind of, when we come back, say, I rank this a 3, you rank this a 1, and we can maybe potentially find some consensus on some of these. And then again, the working groups can start to look at, low-hanging fruit.
It also got longer because I have included
The land use.
the land use committee, but I've also brought in the goals from the Places to Live dialogue.
Yes.
And there is overlap, so there are going to be less rows. The land use committee is in there, and Tracy has folders, but that's not in here. So
Okay.
have fun.
Thank you for putting this together.
Hope there's not a timeline on returning this.
By the end of the group. I'm just kidding.
By the 27th?
Okay, and then I would look to staff for the Sherburne School RFQ date has come and ended.
The Sherburne School RFQ closed on the 7th, and today we received 8 responses, which was more than we expected and a good sign. And so it has moved over to the city manager in terms of what's going to happen next. But
And those documents are public.
they are public, and so everybody can see who did respond. And then there's going to be an update from the city manager at the city council meeting on Monday.
Yes, so we know exactly what, us councilors do not know anything that is not, was just shared. So we will get an update from her and her team on Monday, and then we will pass that update, which is why I wanted to meet on the 27th still, so we can kind of discuss that, and then kind of discuss any goals of this committee to have an impact, and then we will bring that forward to the city manager for consideration. As we know, RFQs have a city process of going through staff. So any insight that we would like to present to that staff, we'll kind of get together and give it to staff for any type of consideration.
What type of timeline is there between the RFQ and an RFP?
We do not know.
Okay.
We do not know. The RFQ was left open enough to say if there, is a candidate within there that is a shining star, there's a potential that there is not an RFP process. So I can say that I do not know a defined timeline between the two, if there will be one.
I have a closing question. The very first thing we did in this committee was to make a letter of recommendation for PHA for $2 million or $3 million to HUD. That
Some
was
money,
the very first thing we did. Does anybody have a status on that? Has PHA ever reported back to us of accessing that money that they needed for?
So that was, yes, so that was a federal incentive, and I believe that they did not get it for that project. I'm not 100% sure, but I can get a follow-up for you, yes. I'll get a follow-up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on Sherburne?
No.
That's it.
Okay, public comment. Please come up to the mic, state your name.
Was my first reverse? Oh, do we not? Mine's down here. No, but I have a purple one for work.
Thank you. Jim Smalley. Just a couple of thoughts, because I know it's after 7 here. I said this the last time, and some of you folks weren't here, but the incentives for zoning to get those additional units, it's bad economics. It is, I don't care what that report says, it is bad economics. You're artificially reducing the supply. The city's choosing to artificially reduce the supply in hopes of getting additional units. Right? But that you're going to gain some. You're going to get 10, you might get 20 on the upside. But you also have the units that were not proposed, that were not built. Those count. And you need to subtract them. Yep, you gained 10, but did you lose 10? Did you lose 15? Do the math. It's not just what you can touch, what you can point to, but what was lost. That's the unintended consequences. All right? The Christmas tree shops, it's like 315 units or something like that, right? None of them are targeted as affordable housing, but you have 315 units, of which, unless 100% of them are bought by or rented by folks who live outside of Portsmouth, you now have created 315 units, or 150, where folks who live within Portsmouth can then move, which creates additional, it helps cut the cost curve. So while the goal here is affordable housing, that actually helps create affordable housing, because you're adding to the supply. All right? Does that make sense? The former mayor, I know I had a comment here on that. The former mayor's plan is to do a tax abatement credit, whatever it would be. That is for those folks who are renting out to existing folks. So you have the incumbents, right, who have that piece. Who's going to pay for that? Right? Other homeowners other renters. So now you're driving up the cost on everyone else. How did that make housing more affordable? When you, the properties, there was 11 properties up on that site. Are they all considered for housing, or is it, I know it was ranked from 26 to 52 or something like that? Those that are less desirable, I'd suggest selling to the private sector and taking that money and putting in, you mentioned a land trust or something like that. You know, put it there, take that money and you probably have to throw something into the city coffers to offset taxes, but something like that where you can begin financing things, right? Something that would help the folks. I had a couple of thoughts, but I think it's after 7 and I'm sure you all want to get home.
Thanks,
Just the last piece, the Commerce Way thing. Just because something's hard doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, right? And I'll call them excuses. Right? Oh, we can't do that. Oh, you don't want to do that. Oh my goodness, it might have ripple effects if you do that. Do it. Challenge it. Don't accept the same toolbox with the same tools that have caused this problem. You know, go back and say, Atlantic Heights, I live up the street from you. I live actually closer to the highway than you did, or did. It's a phenomenal place. It's a gem in Portsmouth. That is illegal with 7-foot ceilings. Is there a risk there to you? Right? Was there anything bad that, you know, geez, you know, my hat's hitting the roof here? You know, it's, why? And then you had the ADU units. You worked roughly 2 years on that, right? And you did all this great work, and then you have the planning board come in and say, oh, you know, now 750 feet, we like that better. Upon what principle? I used to live in a basement apartment in the Bronx that had mice living in the ceiling, roaches running through the place. That to me was home. We need more housing that people may not like, right? That for some reason it's beneath us. It's awful to hear when I hear stuff like that. Anyway, that's enough.
Thank you, Jim. I always appreciate that you show up and always have a comment. Just one more piece before we break out. We have nominated another member, Andrew Simonis. He's a planning board member to join. I know there's been a lot of conversation, and we do have staff and Beth who also sit on the planning board, but after talking to the planning board chair, there was a conversation of him joining, and so that vote is going towards council on Monday, and so he potentially would be joining our committee.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Got it?
Second?
Sure.
Okay. All in favor? Thank you all so much.